Hello and welcome to the Doofcast, a film and TV podcast from Doof Media. My name is Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Matt Fremen. How's it going, Matt?
That's right, Scott. And this is it.
What do you mean, this is it?
I mean, this is the podcast that we've been building up to.
This is the past 150 episodes are really just for this one moment?
Yeah, that was all. That was all just the beginning. This is the main event.
That was Doofcast Part 1.
Yeah, exactly.
This week on the show, we are going to be talking about Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 1. We're going to be spending the whole episode talking about this movie. We've divided our conversation into a few non-spoilers and spoiler sections. So we're going to start out the episode just talking about our overall thoughts, no specifics, no spoilers. Then we're going to get into some spoilers, and then we're going to wrap everything up with some talk about the book and what we think is going to be in Dune Part 2.
That's right. So just to be clear, if you haven't watched the movie and you haven't read the book, you should be fine for the first spoiler section. Second spoiler section, you'll be fine if you've watched the movie, but not if you've read the book. Third spoiler section, you better have read the book.
Did everyone get that? You all got it? All right, Matt, let's talk about Dune.
There's something happening to me. There's something awakening in my mind. I can't control it.
What did you see?
There's a crusade coming.
Do you often dream things that happen just as you dreamed them?
Yes.
The test is simple. Remove your hand from the box, and you die.
What's in the box?
Pain.
Hey, Matt, what is Dune about?
Well, it's a feature adaptation of Frank Herbert's science fiction novel about the son of a noble family entrusted with the protection of the most valuable asset and most vital element in the galaxy.
Sure. That's definitely what Dune is about.
I don't know if anybody's ever successfully summarized what Dune is about, actually.
I think Denis Villeneuve has. It just took him 2.5 hours.
That's true.
This movie was written by John Spaeth's Denis Villeneuve and Eric Roth. It was directed by Denis Villeneuve, and it stars just about everybody. Everybody that is in Hollywood and is good at acting is in this movie.
Yeah, that's basically true. It seems like they just got all of the actors where if you have the reaction of like, oh yeah, that guy's that they're great. They got that person and they put them in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, just Charlotte Rampling like shows up for a 5-minute scene. Charlotte Rampling's in this movie for 5 minutes, and then she's gone. Javier Bardem is in this movie for like 10 minutes, and then it's just wild. It's wild.
It is amazing. It's. I think maybe the place to start for me, at least, is like. What did I do to deserve this? Well,
I think the place to start, just in case anyone listening doesn't know your history, I would say, generously, you are obsessed with Dune.
Yeah, I think what I said to you the other day is that the novel Dune is basically like a stash of psychedelic drugs that I discovered when I was 12 years old and imbibed, and then like had a massive perspective changing drug trip. Effectively, that's the effect the book had on me, because it, especially reading it at a young age, which incidentally Denis Villeneuve read it when he was 14, and it had a similar effect on him as far as I can tell. That's what I mean is like, this is a movie that is basically made by somebody for whom the book means as much to him as it does to me, if not more.
Sure.
I think Villeneuve could probably argue at this point that Dune means more to him than it does to me. But that's like such an incredible gift, right? To have one of your favorite things adapted, and not just done like competently, but done with like complete understanding and love.
Yeah. So I guess to get into how you thought about this movie after we've set your expectations sky high, you enjoyed Dune, did you?
I did. You know, one thing that I'd said before was I was trying to remind myself that it's just a movie. It's not gonna be a life-changing event. But the thing is, it is just a movie, but Villeneuve is enough of an artist, and frankly, everyone involved is enough of an artist and doing the best they possibly can at their craft, where it's one of those movies that is, a fantastic piece of art that stays with you, right? I mean, I think that's fair to say. Again, I'm biased in favor of the source material,
Sure.
but I found that there's the imagery of the movie has been kind of playing through my mind in the background. Since I've seen it, I just found it to be well executed and just a piece of art on its own, actually.
Yeah. So I mean, my history with Dune is not quite as extensive as yours. I think the first time I read Dune was for the book club episode we did on it a couple years ago. So my dad loved these books and was always talking about them, and I just never actually took the time to read it until we had to do a book club on it. And I really, really enjoyed the book, but I did not have the emotional attachment to it that you did. I did, however, have emotional attachment to Denis Villeneuve, one of my favorite filmmakers ever right now. And man, I really, really liked this movie. I think there's something I was talking to you about earlier. Like, if I needed 2 words to sum up who Denis Villeneuve is as a filmmaker, I think the words would be scale and tension. And I think these are the things that Villeneuve is most concerned about and most interested in. And I just feel like Dune, the story works perfectly for his kind of for his interests, for the what type of filmmaking he wants to make. This movie is massive. It is unapologetically massive. It knows, like, and I mean physically, I mean the physical scope of the movie is massive, but the thematic scope of the movie is massive. The technical scope of the movie is massive. It's just huge. And Villeneuve always understands that scale. I love how many shots we have of just like big, massive ships and the way he shoots the sand dunes, the way he shoots the worms, the way he shoots just like the towns on Arrakis, like that main city, like the swoop over that main city is just so fascinating, and it feels humongous and important. It's just everything. And then that other one is tension. This is a tense movie, Matt. Like, I think half the movie, no spoilers, is waiting for something to boil over, and we don't quite fully understand what that thing is until it actually happens. And Villeneuve just plays that tension card perfectly. I don't know. Have you ever seen the movie Sicario? Villeneuve's?
Yeah, I have.
That's like the scene on the bridge in Sicario is one of the most tense like movie scenes I've ever watched in my life. And he takes that general idea and just like smothers this movie with this kind of recurring beat of tension. And the thing is, the audience is not quite sure why we're so tense, but we know we are. And I think it just makes for a really enjoyable viewing experience.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, just to react to both of those points, it's funny because I feel these days like it's you can feel like you're immune to scale and spectacle, because we see so many movies that are just almost nothing but scale and spectacle. But I think the Villeneuve and again, all of the creators who do all of the visual effects, they bring so much artistry to it, and so much kind of power, like underlying emotional power to what they're showing you, that it just strikes you completely differently. There were a couple of sequences in here where I think my jaw was hanging open just with like with the awe of what I was seeing, which is it's kind of amazing that he can still do that even in this era of basically perfect computer graphics, and you can do whatever you want. And then there were some like simple things where it would honestly just be like Paul's bedroom, or the room where like the training room. It's just like or I mean almost any room honestly is like, it's just like a perfect little piece of like architectural artistry.
Yeah.
And also like lighting and mood. And that's not epic, right? That's not like vast scope. It's just like precisely dialing in aesthetic, pleasing to the eye-ness.
Yeah, and it's all world building as well. I mean, I think one of the reasons why Dune has been so often called this completely unadaptable story, and why great directors like David Lynch have arguably failed to adapt it, is because it is so dense. The mythology is so rich. There's so much going on in this book. And how do you distill that into a movie format? How do you do that? And I think what Villeneuve has done here is, it's not like he carved all that out of the movie. he just kind of finds ways to gesture towards it. And a lot of the set decoration and stuff is the way he does that, the way he gestures to this larger world, this larger mythology, without like going through the exposition to explain every beat of it. He just he gets enough and to let you know there's a wider world here with things going on that we don't quite understand. But he trusts the audience that it's okay that we don't fully understand all of it, that we don't need to have a complete grasp on every little detail of this world to be taken on an emotional journey through the story. And I think that's great, and it works perfectly in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's certain things I'm thinking about where it's basically visual storytelling. It's like we learn everything we need to know about, this particular group of antagonists just by kind of seeing them in their natural habitat. We barely need to hear them say anything. We get it because we see the visual storytelling. It's interesting, and I guess I'm going to say this in a way that's not spoilery, although it could segue into the spoilers part of the conversation. But I guess one thing that I wanted to talk about is the fact that he did pick a particular dramatic through line to single out. And he is leaving things out. Like he just is. Like there are whole scenes. There's a lot of intricate politics that he's not included in this adaptation. It's interesting and I think a bit funny. No judgment here, but like I've seen a lot of takes on Twitter that were like, yeah, it was pretty good, but like I wish it were longer and more boring. And they don't actually say that. What they actually say is like he left out all of the like politics. What about the dinner scene? I'm like, the dinner scene was a great scene in the novel. The dinner scene would not have translated to film. Okay, it's a dinner scene. So there's a lot of stuff that he intentionally left aside, and like as a super fan, I just have to I have to be like, yeah, like to make this into a movie, you had to pick certain things and pick a certain dramatic through line and plot through line and have that be what the film was, because you were just talking about it being unfilmable. It's like the reason why people say things are unfilmable is often because there's like 10,000 things going on, and it's often a challenge to pick the heart of the story. But I think he has picked the heart. He's in my opinion correctly picked the important key dramatic heart of the story, and I'm actually very happy with what he's doing because it gives me enormous confidence that the finale, the second half, Dune 2, is going to be what it is supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the book near as well as you do. I've only read it the one time a couple of years ago, and honestly, I forgot about the dinner scene until you mentioned it. Like, I was like, oh yeah, now I remember that, but I did not remember it. But I do feel like, based on my memory of the book, this movie captures everything that I wanted it to be. The core of what the story is feels like it's alive and present in this thing, and I think that's what a good adaptation is, right? It takes the core thematic understanding, the understanding of the characters, and then it cuts and carves and puts it in a new, shiny, visually impactful package, and that's exactly what Denis Villeneuve has done with this movie.
Yep, exactly. You think it's time to move into the book spoiler section, or the first half of the
first half of
the movie spoiler section? Sorry.
I think so. I think I'll leave this part of the section. If you are listening to this and have not seen the movie, go see it. Absolutely. If you are able to, see it in a theater. This is, I realize people say this all the time, but this is absolutely a movie that you should see on the big screen, on the biggest possible screen you can. The scope of it, the power of it, the sound of it, just works better in a theater than it does at home. And I've watched it both in the theater and on HBO Max, so I know. See this movie in a theater. Yeah. All right, let's move into spoilers. Spoilers for Dune from now on. Matt, where do you want to begin? There's so much to talk about. I guess Paul Atreides feels like the place to start, right? Because he is the core of the story and the core of this movie. And I think when you're talking about the dramatic through line that they cut away their stuff, the thing that they focused on the most was Paul and his story.
Yeah.
And so let's start there. So what did you think? How did Denis handle Paul Atreides?
I think well, I don't just want to say perfect, because that would imply that I had some idea of what I wanted them to do exactly, that they lived up to, when in reality I think they did maybe better than I would have imagined, if that makes any sense. I'll try to explain what I mean. Paul's a strange character.
Yeah.
Paul is not Luke Skywalker. Paul is a weirdo who has weird mind powers that make him increasingly distant from humanity and go into weird fugues where he like will be like crying and drooling all over the place. Like when they were in the tent and he's like actually drooling. I thought that was perfect, because it's like, yeah, this is not cool. Like, this is not fun for him. This is not a power in the sense of like, you know, he doesn't get to have like the Force and have an awesome badass scene. Like, this is basically a curse that pushes him away from humanity and everyone he loves.
Yeah.
And the way Chalamet, you know, plays him, it is this very like internal, reserved, distant, weird kid, basically.
Yeah.
And but there's more depth to it than just that, which again is like, that's the character. It's perfect. I don't know. This book is so important to me that I'm actually having a hard time talking about it. I don't know if everyone can tell that or not, but I mean, what were your thoughts about this portrayal of Paul?
I mean, I always saw Paul as this kind of weird little shit, and I think Timothée Chalamet plays that perfectly. I think you're totally right that he is weird. Like, this is not a story in which you want to be Paul Atreides, right? Like that is not what this is, and it's Dune is not a spacefaring adventure story. That's not what it is. And so Paul is this guy who is kind of absolutely cursed and thrown against wild expectation, right? We have the expectation of his father to take over the House Atreides and be the lord or the duke of the house, and then we have the expectations of his Bene Gesserit mother, who is basically trying to make him into the Messiah, the person that's going to lead the entire universe to the promised land. And he's completely overwhelmed by these levels of expectation on all sides, and he just can't deal with it. And yeah, that combined with the fact like he's getting super high on spice and seeing visions and going nuts, like it's not, this is not your typical hero's journey type character. Yeah. And I think Chalamet plays that just perfectly.
Yeah, I think one sequence of this movie that hit me, not only did it hit me harder than the Lynch adaptation, but I think it hit me even harder than the book did emotionally, and that was the Gom Jabbar sequence. And the reason is actually because his mom is the one who brought him into the room and then left him there.
Yeah.
And by cutting between him in the room and her outside, it really emphasized like, that's pretty fucked up, actually.
Yeah.
Because his mom knows exactly why the Reverend Mother is there. And she knows what could happen if he fails the test, but she still brings him there. Like, and that just shows, like, that communicates she's first and foremost the Bene Gesserit sister.
Yeah, but at the same time, in the middle of that Gom Jabbar scene, she's like screaming out in agony as well. Like, it's killing her to do this. And I think that's, and again, I don't have perfect memory of the book, but I feel like that is a part of Jessica that Denis has expanded on a little bit here. The kind of push and pull between her Bene Gesserit side and her mother of Paul side, and the conflict that these two sides are having within her. I really think I think that's one of the best things this movie does, is really show she's just not sure. There's just a scene where like she's just walking down the hallway crying because she's just overwhelmed. Like everything's about to change. She's not sure what to do. She wants to take care of her son, but she also thinks her son is going to be the Messiah, and she just doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, I think one way of thinking about her is she's a normal person who has been given this incredible level of training, and so she can fall back on the training, but there's still the person underneath it. And so I like that scene where she cries because she realizes how much danger she's in and Paul's in, and everything is going in a bad direction. And then she realizes like she's about to walk into the room with Leto, and she just like in like 5 seconds, she just like pulls herself together perfectly. And that's her Bene Gesserit training right there. And but yeah, I mean, I like what you just said, because she does bring Paul into the lion's den, but then she is horrified at what she's done, but she still did it, right? And so that's the push and pull. It's kind of, I mean, I don't remember if this scene is even actually in the book, but I like the moment where Leto says, you know, will you protect Paul? No, I'm asking his mother. I'm not asking the Bene Gesserit. And I was like, oh, like that really crystallizes something that I don't think ever really fully occurred to me in that way, which is the Bene Gesserit would bring him into a room where he might die.
I actually think it isn't. Didn't he ask her the opposite? He said, "No, I don't want to know as his mother. I want to know as the Bene Gesserit."
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. You're right. But the point is highlighting the difference between those two sides of her.
Yes. That those two sides are definitely at conflict. And like, yes, it's obvious that Jessica, the mother, would do anything in her power to protect him, but Jessica, the Bene Gesserit, would put him next to a Gom Jabbar that might go bad for him. Yeah. So I think that's there. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things with them. And I think a lot of this was in the book. Like there's the one scene that I think everyone is talking about when they're on the rock changing into the still suits. And she's kind of doing a look over her shoulder at her changing son. Some people interpreted that as like a sexual attraction to him. I have to admit that was not my first interpretation of that scene, but maybe it's just because I'm a poor sheltered boy that doesn't believe a mother wants to bang her son. Because my first interpretation of the scene was that like it's part of her recognizing that he's growing up, and that like maybe once upon a time when my son changed in front of me, I wouldn't have to turn away.
Yeah. But
now he's an adult, and now it is most appropriate for me to like turn away, and I'm like dealing with the realization of that, and that's like, oh my God, I'm losing him. He's becoming an adult. He's stepping into his manhood and going to become this person. And I'm not quite ready for that yet.
Yes, I'm sorry to inform everyone that it is indeed what you just said. It is. I mean, that's what that whole part in the desert is about. It's her sort of having to acknowledge that he's a separate person from her with his own skills and independence, and she's having to rely on him. And because she has she's trying to protect him, but she's also coming to realize simultaneously, like she's not equipped to protect him. She's going to have to become interdependent with him and eventually basically defer to him, because he's going to become this leader.
I love how Villeneuve like demonstrates that change too, because the way the movie opens, like the first scene we see them in, they're sitting around the dinner table, or the breakfast table rather, and he's like he's eating some breakfast thing, and like they're having like a very mother-son conversation. Like, your father wants you to dress up in full uniform for the thing coming up, and Paul is like your typical teenager, is like, why do we have to go full dress for this thing? And then she like commands him to practice his Bene Gesserit powers, and like he does it, he almost does it, he gets really close but doesn't quite do it, and so she chastises him for it. And it's this very like standard mother-child relationship. And then as the movie goes on and we get to about halfway through, and Paul has just kind of taken over, like he's the one leading them into the desert, he's the one explaining to her how the Fremen work, how sand walking works, how all this is going to go down, like, and she is kind of forced to completely defer to him. And it's a big change, and I love how the movie demonstrates that.
And I mean, exactly, because the last thing that happens is she's like, you have to take us to a spaceport or something so that we can get off this planet, and he's just like, no, we're not getting off this planet.
Yeah,
like,
we're not going anywhere.
He makes the decision there, and there's that, and that dynamic is straight out of the books, and indeed it is a complicated thing that kind of persists throughout the story, where she always has trouble with the idea that she has to give up her power and her control, because she's this extremely skilled and intelligent and resourceful person, and so it's not easy for her, actually. And I mean it's interesting the degree to which you can see Dune as like a story about the inevitable conflict between a parent and child as the child grows up.
And Chani, like, maybe spoilers for next movie, but Chani kind of serves as an important linchpin in that conflict.
Yeah, that's That's true. I think in our book club discussion, I said something like I've always sort of thought that Jessica is the secret protagonist of Dune.
I mean, if I'm remembering correctly, I think she was like my favorite character of the story. I really loved her, and I really like. I'm such a huge Rebecca Ferguson fan, so I was already in for this casting decision, and I think she plays the role beautifully, and it's a challenging role. I really think it is because of the multi-sidedness of it, because she has to play all these things and play to expectations and her own wants and fears. I think she just gives this miraculous performance.
Mhm.
I think it's so good.
Yep. It's exactly correct. I mean, we could just go through every major character basically and just rave basically.
Let's do it. Let's talk about Oscar Isaac.
Yeah.
Leto is not a character I remember in the book at all because he doesn't hang around too long. He's there at the beginning and then he dies and then we move on with the story. But man, if you hire Oscar Isaac to play this guy, he's going to instill him with so much gravitas and drama. And I loved this character at a level that I had never thought about before.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of his performance?
Oh, it's perfect. Well, so he's a tough one to do in a movie because I mean but Oscar Isaac does it because like the thing about him in the book, the way he comes off is he's like this perfectly put together guy. He's basically who Paul wishes he was, which is like this kind of perfectly poised stoic leader who you know always knows what to do, always has the answers, is always brave and cunning and you know, with a smile on his face as he does it. Like I think the whole scene where they save the spice miners is perfect. And it shows like he's kind of got this swagger to him, right?
Yeah.
Where he's like, yeah, we're just gonna save these guys because I'm fucking Leto.
Yeah, like damn the spice, I don't care.
Yeah.
We're gonna save these people. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things with him that the audience needs to understand is we need to understand why the Emperor would look at this guy and say, we gotta stop this. We gotta take this guy down. We gotta destroy this house. We need him to be someone that we could fully see the rest of the great houses looking at and being like, I want this guy to be my leader. And I think Oscar Isaac pulls that off perfectly here because I think you're totally right.
Yeah. And then
it's good. He's just good.
Yeah. He is actually as good as we sort of wish Paul was. But also then Oscar Isaac's able to bring in the desperation as he begins to realize like he has been set up and then when everything goes to complete shit, it's like, yeah, I mean, he's his actual death scene I just thought was
so good.
It was like nothing like I ever imagined it, because that's frankly not how it exactly happens. Like I think they're in a much smaller room. It's not this like spectacular scene. It's basically just executed much differently. But in a movie, you have to make different decisions to make stuff conveyed properly in movie format on the screen. And I think that everything they did was what they had to, I'm not going to say an improvement because it's like, well, no, the way Herbert did it worked for a book, but this works for a film.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was remarkably effective. Like, just the whole scene, like the giant long table with Leto at the one end, completely naked, and Baron Harkonnen, which we probably talked about this on the book club, but I've said Harkonnen my entire life, and just hearing Harkonnen, like I just can't get over it. It's probably right, but I can't get over it.
Yeah, I always said Harkonnen also, but when I realized that it's like supposed to be a real word from like a Scandinavian language, then I'm like, oh, okay, it's probably Harkonnen then.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone was going to get it right, it was going to be Denis Villeneuve, right? So, so we have Stellan Skarsgård's Harkonnen like devouring food at the other end. It's just perfect. And then I remember, I know he doesn't die in that moment, right? Like I've read the book, I know he doesn't die, and yet there was part of me that was just like, fuck yes, got him. He got him. He's dead. And then it's so wild that I think there's one thing, this movie, it like assails you with scale and scope and things that like you you just eventually just have to like buy into it. Like you just have to let yourself go and be completely absorbed by it. And so everything I remembered about the book, everything I remembered about the characters and where they were going, at some point they just melted away and I was just like in it. And so things like that happened where I was like, oh shit, they killed Harkonnen. And like I knew that wasn't true, but in the moment I didn't. And I, like that's something like I think that's something Villeneuve does with all his movies to me, where like they're so visually impressive, they're so tactically impressive, they just like overwhelm your senses until you just like, it's kind of, I mean, it works for this movie. It's kind of like getting high. It's kind of like a trip, because you just kind of you have to just let go and just be in the movie.
Yeah. And I think during the breakdown, when everybody's getting massacred, it's different enough from the book that you're not really sure what direction things are going to go. Like
Sure.
I could have bought it if they killed, Duncan Idaho, or they did kill Duncan Idaho. I could have bought it if they killed Gurney Halleck or somebody else, because like I've kind of accepted certain things are definitely not going to be the same in Dune 2 either. And so they might kill certain characters in this part that I would not expect them to. Not that they don't seem to have done so, but yeah. I mean, I think yes. So Skarsgård is a great Baron.
Oh my god! He's loving it, man.
Yeah.
He's chewing that scenery up and having such a good time.
Yeah.
Him in the black pool is so good. It's not subtle imagery there, talking about, the oil metaphor here is, it's very, very transparent.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean he's pretty minor role, but and a lot of what's great about it is all the visual details, like you said, like he's always like immersed either in like the oil or like that white gas the first time we see him.
Yeah, and he's when he floats, like we don't even really get to see the technology that's floating him.
Mm-hmm.
Like I guess it's along his spine, right? But
yeah,
it's just like he kind of just silently like floats up, and the first time we see it, he's got that really long robe on that just extends all. Oh god, what a character.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a perfect way to bring what the book describes as a really disgusting individual to life.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's one part of the novel that I think was left aside, is just how kind of involved his plotting got, and they really they boiled it down to the basics that you need to understand to follow,
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
yeah,
in my mind, all you need to know is that this was all set up by the Emperor and he's in league with the Baron, right?
Yeah. So the other stuff that is like also very fun in the book is just, for example, the idea that the Atreides are clued into the fact that there's a traitor in their midst, that there's a high-ranking traitor, but they don't know who exactly. And this leads all of the leadership to begin pointing fingers at each other. Thufir Hawat suspects Jessica, and that leads to a conflict between them. And like that would like, and part of me is like, oh, that would have been such a cool scene to see, Thufir Hawat and Jessica have an argument, and then that even leads to something that happens, and that happens later in the book, the fact that he's suspicious of her and believes that she was the traitor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, a part of me is like, so it's just kind of a shame that we're not going to get that. But then, the greater part of me is like, okay, but think through the implications. If you had included that scene, and if you had included all of these other scenes that you wanted, you just muddy the clarity of the emotional through line. And
sure.
And you're no longer really sure what what's the point from moment to moment, and also not just the dramatic through line, but also just the tension. Like we were just saying, like it's this masterpiece of tension. Like from the moment, even before they get to Arrakis, it's you're just like, God, like everything is just off, and you just know something terrible is going to happen.
Yeah, well, you're kind of in Paul's perspective with that, right? Because you get the feeling that, and I think this is true to the book, that like everyone in House Atreides knows that this is a death sentence, that they're being fucked over here, because it just doesn't make any sense. It just makes zero sense for them to just suddenly go, okay, you get Arrakis now, congratulations. and Paul is really the only one that doesn't fully understand the implications of that. And so in the early part of the book, he's just like wandering around listening to all these people tell him this is way serious than he thought. And he's kind of like, it's at the beginning, it's like an adventure for him. He's like, he's excited, but everyone else around him is tense. And I think that you feel that tension and you don't quite understand it. And I think that makes it more tense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And then if you interject into the middle of that, like a different dialogue scenes that are not tense, then it just breaks that whole thread.
I mean, I guess that is a question. I know you've just said this, and maybe you'll just repeat what you just said, but do you think there was a version of this that where like they change where we cut at the end of part one? Because I have to be honest with you, the one thing I was surprised about is where Denis chose to end the movie, because it always felt like I knew going into this movie that this was part one of two. Or maybe even three. I think he's talking about how he wants to do three now. I didn't know where the cutoff was going to be. And there was part of me that like, there were moments in the movie where I felt like we had reached a natural cutoff point. I was like, oh, this is when the movie is going to end. And so would you have liked them to front load with more of that political maneuvering in early Arrakis stuff and then cut off part one at the fall of House Atreides? Like we see kind of Jessica and Paul escape into the desert on their own, and then that's end of part one.
I mean, part of me does, but nobody would have liked that movie except me. Like I'm able to admit, you know, I saw it in the theater, and a good number of the people walking out of that movie were like, basically, not my cup of tea. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't even be mad at them, you know, because I was like, you know, I get it. it's kind of a slow, weird movie.
Yeah. I mean, if you walked into this movie expecting Star Wars or Star Wars-esque, you were going to definitely be disappointed because that's just never what Dune was. And
right.
There are action sequences in this movie, but they're few and far between. And I actually think the way Villeneuve shoots the action sequences are almost like antithetical to good action. Like the final duel between Paul and what's his
Jamis.
name? Yeah. That is the way he shoots that. It's not like it's a climactic duel that's going to finish your movie. It's just like for the first half of the duel, there's no music. The camera is like far away, and it's kind of a wide shot of the two of them just like smacking each other's knives. It's just not shot in a way that you're like, oh fuck yeah, action sequence.
Yeah.
And that fits the emotion of the scene, I think, because like what's going to happen here is Paul's going to take his first life, and it's going to change him fundamentally.
Mm. Yeah, right. I think that's the way to approach the material, by the way, because I'm kind of repeating stuff that I said back in our book club, but like Luke Skywalker gets an awesome laser sword. It's like a knightly weapon, which you've then made even more badass by making it a laser. Mm-hmm. And what does Paul get? He gets a knife that you cut people and stab them.
Yeah, but it's not fun. That's like this movie is not fun.
Exactly.
and so it's like I there is part of me, and I want to finish our conversation talking about the audience reaction to it, because I think that's really interesting, the general audience reaction to it. But like I just like there's no fun in this movie, and I don't think there should be fun in this movie. It's just not that kind of story. Yeah. But it's just like how do you make $180 million movie that is not fun at all?
Yeah. The closest thing was a kind of like odd horror. like some people pointed out that the Sardaukar come off as very Warhammer 40K because they're so just like extra in their grimness.
And I loved the way they did them kind of drop shipping kind of.
Yeah, that was cool.
Individual kind of drop. Yeah.
The scene that I was talking about when I said like my jaw dropped was when Duncan steals the ornithopter and he's running away, and the big ship starts shooting at him with the laser gun, and he's evading it, and you've got this, you know, super weapon basically just like rastering its way through this city, which you know is populated, and he's just like taking cover and dodging and like hiding behind things, and the laser beam just like decimates like it's just, like things are just collapsing, like buildings are collapsing all around him, and like there was a feeling of impact to that. It's funny because like when when a giant alien crashes into a skyscraper in New York or something in the Avengers, it's like you know that this is, there's no stakes here, but for some reason, like I felt it when this laser is just like cutting through the city.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was again, it's not like you're having fun, because what you're watching is something horrible and horrifying. But like what I mean is that it was effective and that I felt things. So that's
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Jason Momoa is the only character in this movie that gets to have fun.
Yeah.
Duncan Idaho is like the only character that remotely has anything resembling a joke, and any scenes where he gets to be fun. And I actually think that's a really interesting choice, right? I was talking to you about this before we started recording, like this idea that Duncan Idaho doesn't talk like anyone else in the story. Everyone else is like super serious and formal. Like the difference between Duncan and Gurney is just fucking hilarious. And Duncan Idaho, like he calls Paul Atreides my boy.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're obviously very, very close. And I just feel like this is a character who gets to be Paul's kind of attachment to his childhood, right? Like he's known this guy since he was a little kid. He's been training him since he was little. He's kind of his second father. And he's probably like this. I don't think this is in the movie specifically, but I think it's in the subtext that like he's the father that just doesn't have these crushing expectations of him. He just likes him, and he just enjoys teaching him and enjoys being around him. And I really feel like Duncan Idaho getting to play basically Jason Momoa being Jason Momoa really enhances and sells that idea that he is this unique, different character in Paul's life. And it also makes it all the more tragic when he dies, because this is a part of Paul then that is dying, that like the last vestige of his carefree, innocent childhood is this connection with Duncan Idaho, which is taken from him. And I really think the choice to allow Momoa to just go like full Aquaman really, really, really worked for me.
Yeah, he removes a lot of the sterility, which is, I think, otherwise very much present. Like the book definitely has this kind of incredibly cerebral feel to it. Like that's why the Lynch adaptation had all these voiceover of what people are thinking, because the book is rife with this. Like every time people are having a conversation, you're seeing their words, and then you're usually seeing like what both of them are thinking in italics at the same time, because there's this elaborate game of chess being played at all times where nothing anyone ever says is what it seems. Which I think is kind of awesome and works very well, and has in fact been like, copied a billion times to the point where it no longer seems novel when you find it in the book. Although I think it basically was fairly fresh at the time. In this movie rather, there's no voiceover. It's all just the performances and, of course, your understanding of the subtext. But Momoa is there, I think, like you said, to bring out the humanity and a little bit of playfulness. But then you kill him, and then you're like, yeah, that's not what this movie is.
Nope. Sorry, your playfulness gone. I want to talk about the visions a little bit, because I think they're such an omnipresent part of this movie, and I really think it's unique the way Villeneuve handles this. The movie is like much less trippy and druggy than I think the story is. Like the story is like really trippy, right? Like this book was written in the 60s. There's a lot of LSD going on, and I think that's kind of related in the book itself. But I think Villeneuve is just a different kind of filmmaker, and so the way he handles like kind of the trippiness of the story is through these like flashes of visions that Paul gets, which I think is really effective. I understand that people were very upset because Zendaya is like not actually in this movie at all. She's like in it for like 5 minutes total of just all these various visions that he's seeing of her. But excuse me, I don't know. What did you think? What did you think of how the future sight or whatever it's called was handled?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to do it something like that, where you're establishing the idea that Paul is a bit disoriented and hasn't really mastered this ability that he has, because he can see the future, but not in a way that's very helpful to him at this point in time. And also the idea, I think one thing that's been pointed out by many people is the movie does successfully show you that he's not seeing the future, he's seeing possible futures.
Yeah.
And you know, I you know, even being a fan, I was like pleasantly confused by this character they kept showing who was like giving him fatherly advice, and I was like, well, that Stilgar? No, Stilgar is Javier Bardem.
Mm-hmm.
Who is this character? And then I got like the very fun surprise at the end of realizing like, oh, this character is Jamis, the guy who he has to kill. And that was like a different possible future where if things had played out differently, and we don't even know what that would have looked like, but if things had played out differently, then maybe he would have been his mentor. And there's even this idea that Paul remembers him being his mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's even more tragic. Something I sort of caught the first time and appreciated more the second time I watched it through was that after he stabs Jamis and Jamis is laying on the ground dying, he grasps his hand and Jamis grasps it back, and it's like there's this real sense of loss, at least on Paul's side, because he's like, this was like this guy could have been a friend and an ally, and it's terrible this had to happen.
Because kind of what we're told about, if Paul is the one, what he'll be able to do is like his mind will be open to past, present, and future, right? And so like this idea that not only is he seeing visions of this guy guiding him through the desert and teaching him the ways and all these things, but he's actually experienced all that as if he's lived it. And I think we do kind of see that a little bit with Johnny, with Zendaya's character, because there's that wonderful moment where he like says her name and she looks at him like, what? And he's like, never mind. We're like, he feels like he knows her really well because he's been dreaming about her forever and probably has like experienced this stuff as if he was there. And it's just the awkwardness of being Paul. It's why his existence is so isolating, because like he's got all these experiences that, now we're learning some of them aren't even real or aren't even true, weren't going to happen. I love that too. And I want to pat the movie on the back for like having the bravery to be okay confusing us with that stuff, because I gotta admit, the first time I watched it, I was like, wait, that was the guy he saw in all the visions, like training him, like that's the guy that's going to teach him how to be a Fremen, but then he just killed. What does that mean? How does that happen? And I was confused, and I think a lot of people probably watching the movie were confused, but the movie's okay with you being confused there. I think some of the most rewarding artistic experiences are ones in which the art just leaves you generally confused and just scratching your head. And I think in especially in big budget storytelling, we're kind of so afraid to do that because some people have negative reactions to it. They don't want to be confused. They want everything spelled out for them. I love that this movie, this big budget, huge, heady sci-fi movie, is willing to be like, I'm going to confuse these people. I'm going to confuse them, and they're not going to be sure about what's going on and why it's going on.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, and doesn't ever fully explain it, although it definitely, I think, has enough information for you to figure it out. Like he also sees a vision that appears to be his own death. Yeah, which
it's Johnny stabbing him, right?
Yeah, which obviously doesn't happen. But
well, no, he sees multiple of his own deaths. He sees Jamis stab him and win that fight, and then he also sees Chani stab him at some other point.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's, I think that's a very fun sequence that I want to go back and watch a fourth time, because it's a sequence of images where, due to the way we've been trained by movies, we interpret it as meaning a certain thing, but it could be any number of things. And it's funny because that's actually what Paul says. He's like, I think I saw my own death. It's confusing because you don't really know, like Chani is there and then Paul gets stabbed and it's like, well, and then Chani's holding a knife and it's like, well, maybe she stabbed him. That's, I don't know. I don't remember it well enough to speak to it, but like, you're not exactly sure what you're seeing, and neither is he. And that's, I think, intentional.
Yeah. Remarkably done. I loved it. I loved all of that stuff. Here's the thing I didn't love. The one thing I didn't love about this movie, Hans Zimmer, we got to have a conversation.
So I would even broaden this to say, hey, if you want me to keep going to movie theaters, get your sound mixing right. And maybe I'm not talking to the filmmakers, maybe I'm talking to the theater chain, but I could not hear what people were saying at certain points.
It's a very mumbly movie, and yeah, I mean, I don't know if we want to blame the sound mix by the filmmakers themselves or not, but definitely all the parts of this movie I watched when I got home from the theater, I've watched with subtitles on for sure, because characters mumble a lot. Like, I mean, this is one of the most interesting choice that Villeneuve makes in this movie, Matt, to me, is like the most well-known line of the movie is about fear is the mind killer, is kind of like breathlessly like whispered by a character that we can't necessarily hear it very well. It's such an interesting choice. Like every Hollywood tendency would tell you, no, we need to make that like loud and boisterous and clear. And so we're like, look, it's the line, guys. We're doing the line.
He does it over and over, honestly. And again, I don't know if I want to blame him or not, because so several times it happens when Leto dies. Apparently what he says is, here I am, here I remain. I didn't hear the second part of that.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I watched it at home and I had the subtitles on.
One of my favorite things is when they're diving down to save the spice mining crew, and he says on the radio, like get your shit together, this is Duke Leto Atreides. And in this movie, it's like, it's on the radio, so you can't really. and I was like, that's an interesting choice. And then just everything the Baron says, I can't understand, because they put some kind of distortion effect on his voice. So don't love it. But then when I got home and I watched it on my TV with my good sound system that I can like turn up when I need to, it was mostly, I would say 80% fine. There was still 20%. There was still the 20% where I was like, you just mixed the music in too loud. Yeah,
well, I think Zimmer gets too obsessed with the percussion and the bass, and like that's what this, like the whole soundtrack of this movie is just like percussion and bass. And I think you get to a point where the bass is so overpowering. Like you combine that with a theater that's like, yes, we have excellent sound system here, and to most people, excellent sound system just means turning the bass all the way up. And I think that kind of combination tends to drown out, especially the quiet whispered lines of the movie. But I don't know, man. I'm just kind of sick of Hans Zimmer's thing. Like I just feel like he's been making the same music for like 30 years.
Yeah. I noticed, even I was just listening to the soundtrack and I was like, this is very reminiscent of the song in Gladiator soundtrack, which I listened to 100,000 times when I was a kid, or not a kid, but younger.
Like I say this as a person who like loved Hans Zimmer, you know, but it's just like, I don't know. I feel like these movies also, like, it's just almost overpowering. I just want to be like, hey, can we just chill like a little bit?
Yeah. And part of me also, and maybe, you know, this is more of this is subjective. Okay. This is subjective criticism. This is my preference, but I do like it when movie soundtracks are hummable, when there's a theme, you know, when there's a theme that you can hum.
Yeah.
The theme for the Lynch Dune is great. Da, 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 da. It's great. There's nothing hummable in the entire soundtrack of this film. So, personally, I wish there had been.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a bad score. It's just like, it just felt like it made it sound like every Christopher Nolan movie that's ever existed, because that's Hans Zimmer doing all the Nolan movies, which is interesting that he actually did not do Tenet because he wanted to do this movie instead. And then he just makes the same music he always makes. It's just all the same.
Yep. I mean, I agree. Like, so here's the thing though. It works in the movie. It's just that I don't like the music in and of itself. Like, sure. I tried listening to the soundtrack because I was like, I should like this, but I don't. In the movie, it's fine, except where it's blasting over the characters' lines, and then I actively wish that it weren't there. So.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it. Like, I loved it at the beginning. Like, I love I don't even know what they're called, but like the guttural kind of almost sounds like grunting noises that sometimes come through, I think is really effective.
Well, I think some of these are things that he invented.
Wow.
Because I think the idea here, like the reason he was obsessed with this, and I have to kind of give him props for this, is like he wanted it to be like the music that would be played in 15,000 years, where they would have different musical instruments.
Yeah,
so
makes sense.
He made up some instruments. I don't even know what exactly he did, but that's
I just
kinda
can't
cool.
imagine like a young Paul Atreides like popping in his like iPhone 7000 and listening to
Yeah, well, that's because he doesn't have one. There's no computers, so
yeah. Isn't it cool that like I don't think the movie ever comes out and says that, right?
Mhm.
There's never a scene where they explain that like, oh, there was this huge war, and computers and AI and all these things have been completely carved out of this this entire society. There's really never any line that says that, but like I don't think it needs to be there, because like you just understand, like a person coming in that had never read Dune, maybe they'd be asking that question, but I think the world just feels complete regardless of that.
Yeah, right. I mean, if they're asking that question, go read the book, right? Like that's the kind of thing where it's like, if you just put a line in the movie where it's like, isn't it weird that we don't have any computers? Like, no, that's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
so you have to just let it be. Like that's my favorite thing about the ornithopter design. Setting aside the fact that it just looks awesome from the outside, is actually like
so good.
the inside of the ornithopter. It's like a perfect analog Cessna from 1992.
Yeah.
Like everything is like dials that are literally like pneumatic. And I love everything about it.
I do too. Yeah, the ornithopters looked so cool. I loved their design, and I loved how Denis shot them, like the where they're in the sandstorm and then they like are gliding down, and the wings kind of one by one get ripped off. Like it's just again, tension and scale. Like he's so good at these things. It's just like that small cut where they both look at each other as they're only down to one wing, and so the thing's just gonna nosedive. It's just great, man. It's just all great.
Yep.
I loved how the shields looked. I loved how they introduced them and then kind of like very quickly showed their functionality by having Paul like hit the knife against his shield and showing it stopping it, and then having Gurney Halleck like show how you get through them. Like that's just really effective. Like it is exposition, but it's really effective exposition.
Yeah.
I love the sandworms. Like it's just, oh my gosh.
Yeah. The shields, I think the coolest thing about the shields to me was that they did stuff that I hadn't even thought of, but made perfect sense. Like there are bits where like, they'll basically just like, slap the knife away with their hand. And you're like, oh, that makes perfect sense, because you have like what is basically a big shield, which is just your arm and your hand now. Or just like strike at each other in a way that's just more designed to like push rather than actually stab.
Yeah.
And all these things where it's like you see it and you're like, oh yeah, that is how they would treat that if they had that tool. Very thoughtful and very cool.
Yeah, you can tell they spent a long time kind of rewriting how combat would work if this was a tool that everyone had, and it's really effective. I mean, like like the attention to detail here is one of the best things about this movie, because like Duncan Idaho's heroic stand at the end, like if you watch that scene and you like slow it down frame by frame, you can see that every strike he's doing that goes through the shield, he's using the slow gets through the shield technique, right? Like it's just like the commitment to that. It would be very easy to just like run that through on high speed and just like not worry about it. And like, no, he swung at the guy. Don't worry about it. But no, they were committed to making it look real and to spending the time on it, and it worked.
Yeah, which means that it looks very strange actually, because he kind of has to get the blade in a position where it's close to them before he begins to kind of press in, and it's a very, very unique and characteristic way of fighting. And I'm just very like happy that they put the effort in to do that, because
so cool.
Yeah, definitely.
The sandworms, man. The sandworms looked great.
They looked great. We
didn't get to see him. I was honestly like, there was a second there where I was like, are we going to do the someone riding a sandworm thing before Paul finds out about it? Because I remember that being like a big holy shit moment in the book when Paul finds out about that they ride the sandworms. And so they had, what's her name, who is playing the judge of the change. I can't think of the character's name.
Kinds, yeah.
Yeah, they gender swapped the character, right? I think.
Yeah.
They had her like pull out the claws, and I'm like, oh, they're gonna have her do that. I was kind of ready to not like that choice, and then instead they just stab her right through the chest. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I don't know if I like that.
Yeah.
And in that scene where they stab her through the chest, again, attention to detail, we see water
Yes.
flow out
Oh,
before we see
God.
blood.
I love that. That was so good. Like there's so much water imagery throughout the whole just everything. Like a million little things. Like my favorite first example is like, Paul wakes up on Caladan and you see the shadows of the rain on the window against his face. And then when they're at breakfast and she says to practice the voice, it's to pass a glass of water. Like everything is about water.
Yeah.
I just love that so much.
Yeah, and I love, like, this is what I mean, like, just the adaptive choices of this story. You can't put everything in the story, right? There's too much, and so you have to make decisions. And I love that Villeneuve put the scene in with the palm trees, which is not exactly how it plays in the book, but there are like trees that exist that we're spending incredible amounts of water to keep alive in this temperature for the symbol that they represent. And I love that worked its way into the story. I think in the movie, it's more to kind of set up the idea that the Fremen believe that in a green Arrakis, which is, I don't remember that being set up in the book quite as early in the story.
I do think that the palm trees are legitimately part of that narrative, but I agree that maybe it's not framed that way. I forget exactly, because I think what we learn about that through Liet Kynes' point of view, and because we don't have Liet Kynes' point of view, we have to verbalize certain things.
Sure. All right, are you ready to go? Second layer of spoilers.
Second layer, yeah. We're putting the dream within a dream layer spoilers.
So yeah, we're going to talk about what we think Denis Villeneuve is going to do with part 2, based on what we know about the book. So from here on out, spoilers for the end of the novel Dune, and maybe some of the sequel, which I've never read, but I know kind of basics about, to kind of guess what Denis is going to do with this. So Matt, I guess, like, where do you think part 2 is going to go? We've had some changes from the story in the novel. Do you think there's going to be any kind of big change in part 2?
No, I would more expect a narrowing down of things. Like I think there are certain scenes that I'm like 90% sure are going to be in there. Like we've set up animosity between Stilgar and Gurney Halleck, and so there's a scene in the second half that's going to be they find Gurney Halleck again, and Stilgar is immediately kind of annoyed because Paul has this much stronger relationship with Gurney Halleck. And Stilgar and Gurney Halleck are now kind of arguing over Paul, and he has to, and basically he has to kind of go cold on them and be like, get your shit together, both of you. You work for me, which is a great moment for him. And so like I would bet money that's going to be a scene because they've set that up. Other things, for example, the fact that Gurney Halleck pulls a knife on Jessica because he thinks she was the traitor. I don't know if that's going to be in there. Actually, it kind of has to be plot wise, but they could do something different, I guess. See, like that's the thing. You ask me to make predictions, and I'm like, well, there's all sorts of ways of doing certain things, but the basic plot beats, I don't think they're going to change.
They could very easily put that in there. I mean, we don't really even see what happens to Gurney Halleck at the end of this movie, right? We just kind of leave him, perhaps assumed dead. So I think his returning to the story will be a surprise for viewers of the second movie. And I mean, he could very well have just decided in between now and then that it must have been Jessica that betrayed them. And so like it won't quite have the setup that the book had, but I think it could still pay off.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing and the most confident thing I have going forward is that Villeneuve understands that this is a tragedy.
Yes.
That this movie, the second movie, is not going to end with Paul, the glorious savior of Arrakis.
Yeah.
It's going to end with Paul kind of abandoning his humanity, cutting a deal to become emperor, right? And losing control of the people that have come to think of him as Messiah. So like it just, you can see, knowing where the story is going, you can like see in this movie all the ways in which Denis is like very cleverly maneuvering the story to set those kind of things up. And so I have utmost confidence that they're gonna that the truism of what Dune is the tragedy of Paul Atreides. I think is going to go forward into these next movies.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting because like there's always a lot of think pieces about how like a Dune is a white savior narrative, and those ignore the fact that it's a movie or it's a story that's literally like commenting and exploring what that even means. But in order to do that, the first half of the movie did kind of have to lean a little bit into that being what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, I think we're going to get like a lot of people who have just seen this movie. I think I would be perfectly understandable if they look at just Dune Part 1 and say, oh, it's same old trope, same, hero's journey and white savior. And I think it's just because of the necessity of what they're doing and the decision to carve it in two. We've only got half the story here.
Yeah, I think that they plant the proper seeds, like you said. Like, for example, when Jessica explains the Missionaria Protectiva to Paul, she literally says, like, the Bene Gesserit have been here. They've planted legends to basically serve the whims of the sisterhood. Like, this is a cynical exploitation, and Paul and Paul is sort of disgusted by this. Like, his reaction in that moment is to be like, this is manipulation. I don't know what he says exactly, but he's clearly against it and thinks it's bad and thinks it's manipulative. And what we're going to see is him, in the second half, turn into realizing, like, fully realizing it's fake, fully realizing he's not the Messiah because there is no Messiah, because this is all made up. Choosing to pose himself as the Messiah and choosing to emphasize, oh, look, I'm fulfilling the prophecies. And then eventually declaring himself the Lisan al-Gaib, and that's one interesting thing about the way this movie ended, by the way, is it should have, if we were following the plot of the book, it should have ended with him taking on his name Muad'Dib, and also Usul, his like private name. We had no Muad'Dib. I wonder why they chose to do that. I wonder if it was just because people wouldn't know what the hell to do with it if they hadn't read the book.
Well, I mean, they planted the seeds for it over and over again with the mouse. Like, we see the mouse in the hologram, and then we see the Muad'Dib mouse in the Dune when they first get out of the tent, and then he sees in his vision Chani taking him to, I guess, a spawning. I don't know, it's like in a. I don't remember if this happened in the book, but it's like a sack. So I don't know what that is, but. So the seeds for the Muad'Dib have been laid, but I don't think the movie says that name once. Like, I don't think it says this mouse is called the Muad'Dib.
No.
And they're going to call you that because you're kind of really weirdly obsessed with this little mouse.
I think I would, if I had to guess, I would say that the next movie more or less opens with him doing his first sandworm ride.
Yeah.
And then he gets his name as a rite of manhood. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I do think, like, I loved this movie. I felt Zendaya turning to Paul and saying, "This is only the beginning," was just a little on the nose for me.
Yeah, a little Hollywood.
Yeah.
I think they were fairly restrained in that sort of thing. That was
they were.
That was the main one where I was like, okay, all right. Whatever.
Do you think they're gonna keep the Jessica is actually a Harkonnen twist?
I mean, it doesn't really matter, is the thing.
Yeah.
Like the only way in which it matters is that Paul has all of this darkness in him. It's he's got this cynical ruthlessness, and you could say selfishness, because if you were going to be maximally cynical, which is maybe not uncalled for in a story like this, you could say that he allows the universe to go down this horrible path of genocidal holy war so that he can get his personal revenge against the Harkonnens and the Emperor. I think that's basically correct, actually. So it's not all that cynical. I mean, maybe he feels like it's just and that the Emperor doesn't deserve to lead, but like, yes, but then there is the genocidal holy war. So
yeah, there is that, Matt. There
Yeah.
is that whole
And-
holy war thing.
and he knows that.
Mm-hmm.
He does. So I don't know. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff. Like people, everybody has their own pet thing that's their favorite thing. Like I just heard on a different podcast, somebody saying like, oh, I really hope they include Count Fenring, the deadly eunuch assassin. And I was
don't
like,
even
okay, like,
remember.
look, I get it. He's a fun character, but like he has no impact on anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like the only reason you even understand that he's cool is because you see inside his head and you realize like that he's privy to all this stuff and he's a total badass, but he never does anything badass. so it doesn't matter to the plot. And there's a lot of stuff like that where I'm like, even as I would love to see, obviously I'd love to see that character. I don't really care if we don't see that character. I also kind of have a theory that we might not even get Fade Routha. Like I think that we may just end up with Raban as the main Harkonnen antagonist. And like the final fight of the second film might be Timothée Chalamet versus
Batista.
And I don't know how, I have conflicting. Okay, first of all, I could be totally wrong. I don't have a high confidence in this, but I mean, I guess I'm just saying this because we didn't see a single shred of Fade Routha in this movie. So you'd have to entirely introduce him and set him up as a worthy antagonist. In the meanwhile, we already have Raban. So I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I do think it's right that like I feel like if you were gonna have Fade Routha as a character in the story, you would have brought him into this part of the story.
Yeah.
Like, why not have him in the beginning of your movie? Why wait until a second whole movie to introduce him? I think you're right. It feels like if I'm trying to cut things down, those are two characters that I could very easily combine together and not lose too much.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think that's a good. I hadn't thought of that, but I think that's a good theory.
Because it's basically just parsimony, right? Like they're both the nephews of the Baron. One of them is kind of dumb and brutish, and one of them is clever but also brutish. So
yeah, I mean, but they're like the movie is kind of shoving all the politicking to the edge, right? So like it's already not as interested in getting down and dirty with the politicking of the story. So I think in that version of the movie, like there's just no place for Sting. So
yeah, there's no place for Sting in Villeneuve's vision, unfortunately.
Yeah. Anything else about part 2? I'm excited. It is still so wild to me. The thing that I left this movie thinking about the most at the time is I can't believe they didn't fucking greenlight the next film. I can't believe they've released this movie into the public like this without having officially said there's going to be another one, because it's just not even close to a complete story. Like it's not even like we found a way to take the first half of Dune and turn it into like its own isolated story with a beginning, middle, and end. Like, no, it's just not that at all. It's just 2.5 hours of setup, which it's setup that I quite enjoyed. I enjoyed it a whole lot, but it's not a complete story. And I think the marketing of this movie kind of specifically chose to not let people know that, which is an interesting choice. Like,
yeah,
I in my theater, when Dune appears on the screen and part 1 appears underneath it, there were some reactions in my theater of people like, huh? Because really none of the marketing said that. And I was listening to some critics talk about this movie, and some of the critic screenings that screened for the critics weeks ago, the part 1 was not in there for that. So it's like they really didn't want people to know that. Or that was not the main push of their marketing machine, was that this is part 1 of maybe 2 or 3.
Seems like they just didn't know what to do with the fact that they knew they didn't have a movie that could stand on its own, and they also knew that they weren't going to necessarily get the sequel, so they just wanted you to please see it anyway. Yeah, and then if you do see it anyway, then we'll make the second one. So which I think maybe the way we can end this conversation. I am
very pleasantly surprised at how well this is being received. Because like you, I walked out of that theater and I was like, I don't think people are going to like this movie. I think this is very slow. It's very ponderous. It's very self-serious, which are all things I love about it, and I think Dune should be. But I think if you go into the movie on a Friday night like expecting a raucous good time, you're going to come out of the theater really pissed off. And so I really expected like the audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes or like the cinema score that they do, like they do exit surveys at some theaters and ask people what they thought. I thought all these things were going to be really low because people were going to feel cheated because they expected a Star Wars-y movie, or they were mad because it was only a part one, or I really expected all these things to happen. And the wildest thing is that none of those things happen. I mean, there are isolated cases of it, but for the most part, the response to this movie has been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah.
From critics, from, Dune obsessives like you, and from just your everyday average go to the movies once every quarter moviegoer. They've all loved this movie, and I feel like I owe humanity an apology for making assumptions about what the general audience is going to react to something. But it's been a real pleasant surprise.
Yeah, and obviously it's made enough money that they've declared that they're going to make the second part. Made way more money than. I mean, look, I was like hoping and praying that it would make a lot of money, but it's made, I think, more money than I even thought it would.
I mean, let's be honest here. It did well. Like, okay, so the last week on Doof After Dark, I asked you to pick the over under, and it was currently tracking at 35 million for the weekend. It blew that out of the water. Yeah. It did above 40 million. So you won. Congratulations. So it did better than it thought it was going to do, which is great. And they're currently estimating it's going to cap out at about 350 million, total worldwide, which is good and is enough to make money off of. But it's not like it made 100 million. I don't want to sell it short because it surpassed all expectations. But it's not like this is the most profitable movie of all time. They're going to turn a profit on it, but it's not like it's a $1 billion franchise or anything.
Yeah, that's. Sure, I get what you're saying. I think it's I think it was marketed well. Like the trailers always looked great.
Yeah, God, they spent so much money marketing this movie. Like they were playing it on like basketball.
Yeah,
like basketball commercials all during the playoffs, which were over the summer, so months and months away. I was seeing Dune everywhere.
Yeah,
they really marketed the shit out of it.
I mean, the fans have been looking forward to it for literally years now, and telling all of their friends how awesome it's going to be. So I think a lot of it, I felt like a lot of what was happening in the theater where I was actually was like people who had dragged their spouse to the theater and been like I love this book, it's going to be great, and the spouse just being like whatever, and in a lot of those cases actually, as I was walking out, I would hear the spouse be like, I didn't get it, and then I was like, yeah.
My wife did not like this movie. Yeah. She did not get it. She did not enjoy it. And that's fine. I really not surprising at all. Like it was not her type of movie. I think she went in expecting something very different. I will say, as much as I just chastised the marketing of the movie for kind of hiding the part one thing, I think the marketing for this movie did a really good job of kind of selling what type of movie this was going to be. I think this is maybe why we didn't get as many angry people walking out of the theater, because I don't think there's any trailer in this movie that sells it as like a raucous good time action adventure thing. Like, and you think like there's a way to cut a trailer together. You change up some music and you focus on the scenes of Duncan, Idaho killing people and the ships flying around, the explosions, and you can kind of build a version of this movie that looks like it's like a sci-fi action movie. They didn't do that. They marketed it as what it is, which is this big, huge science fiction epic story of big, larger than life characters and melodrama, and they were true to what Dune is, and I think that paid off for them.
Right, and especially the first half is the fall of the House of Atreides. Like, so it's this. The trailers all had the correct tone of doom, which I liked. The one thing, sorry, just before we totally stop talking about the movie, forgot to talk about one of my favorite elements, which is how they did the voice.
Oh my God.
Particularly the very first time that he does it, where like, and I was like on the edge of my seat because I was like, how are they going to do the voice? I'm so excited. And then it's like he opens his mouth and he says the words and you don't really hear it. And then it like slams into you like this wall of sound. And God, I was like, oh my God. It's perfect. I loved it.
It was so good. It was so good. I mean, and we got to see it that way, and we got to see the way the high priestess uses it on him. And then it's not really until halfway through the movie that we get to see Jessica use it on the Harkonnen men and see like how deadly this thing can be. And the way they've done it, it sounds so witch-like. Like the Bene Gesserit are kind of witches. I think the men call them witches, right? I don't think the Bene Gesserit would appreciate that moniker, but
yeah. I mean, because there's no magic. It's all just skills.
Yeah.
Like it's all just like you have come to understand human psychology so deeply that you can pitch your voice in a way where, and this is what they do in the movie, by the way, is what it sounds like a lot of overlapping female voices where it's like you're channeling the domineering grandmother of the person that you're talking to, or you're channeling, you know, their seductive mistress, or whatever you need to be channeling for that moment to get them to do what you need. You're understanding them, and then you're being a conduit for that. Like that's what the voice is. Like it's not magic. It's like it's psychology, but it's like science fiction, obviously.
Yeah.
So they did that in a way that I thought made perfect sense, because it literally is female voices overlapped, right?
That's one of the things I really appreciated about watching it in the theater, is I thought that like we've complained about the mix, but the mix for the voice was like too loud in a way that made it creepier. And in my theater, it used surround sound, so like I think the way they layered the voice sounds is that you're right, that it's different women layered on top of each other, and I think they made each of them come from a different direction on like a different speaker, and so it like fully like it's surround. It was so creepy. I loved it.
That's awesome. Yeah.
What did you think about the mentats, or the really not lack of, because they were definitely there, but the movie just does not give any time to explaining what the heck that is?
I guess if I had my wish, I've always been obsessed with the mentats. I kind of wish there was a little bit more mentat. Like Peter de Vries is a character who, in my opinion, is totally not in the movie. You know, like he says a couple lines and then he dies.
Yeah.
You know, that's like the one thing that I prefer about the Lynch adaptation is that Peter de Vries gets such a larger role, and he's such a more like smarmy, disgusting antagonist that you're so happy when he dies. Whereas in this movie, you're just like, oh, that guy, he's dead. Okay, whatever.
Oh, he's dead. Yeah.
So.
Played by David Dastmalchian, who that guy's having a hell of a year, because he played Polka Dot Man in the Suicide Squad movie.
Excellent.
So he's having a good year.
Yeah. In the Lynch adaptation, it was that one guy who is also awesome.
I don't remember. It's been so long since I've seen the David Lynch one.
Brad Dourif.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Wormtongue. So.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't mind that they didn't really focus on him or explain what I thought like the visual for Thiefer Howitt like rolling his eyes back to do calculations was like plenty for me. I was like, yep, that's creepy and wonderful. Love it.
Yeah.
That's all I need.
Yeah. Again, it's a thing where I was like, they were in there. Thiefer Howitt's probably going to show up again, so we'll get some more. It's fine. You know, it's the thing where it's like, if there was more, then that would just be taking the air out of the actual emotional progression of the story. So
sure.
We're okay.
Yeah. All right. I think we've reached the end, Matt. Anything else you wanted to say about Dune? Your last chance to talk about Dune Part 1 ever.
Last chance. I'll never get another chance to talk about it. Shit. No, I think we're good. Very excited about the second one now. Obviously, I recommend it. Well, I guess, yes, my final thought is I was very, very pleasantly surprised by how much my kids actually enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Given that it's a boring, slow movie for grown-ups.
I feel like this is one of those things where they could tell like how into it you were, and therefore like really wanted to be into it.
I think one thing about it is like the reason the reason the novel is appealing is it's full of these like elementally powerful scenes. Like the Gom Jabbar is this like it's just a concept that's just an extremely arresting concept that even a child can understand. You have your hand in the box, excruciating pain. Take your hand out of the box, you get stabbed. What do? That if anything, a child can relate to that even more than an adult. So they were riveted during that. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm just happy this movie exists and it exists the way it did. Like I do not understand why studios keep giving Denis Villeneuve the amount of money they give him to make stuff like this, because like this movie has seen success broadly. This 40 million is his biggest opening of his career. It's great for him. I'm so happy for him. But like, this is not like this is a miracle that this movie got to be this thing, because like, I feel like you make this movie 10 times and 9 times it's just going to fall into the trap of whatever is the most popular type of blockbuster right now. Like I love the Joss Whedon-y type of Avengers jokiness, but like, there's got to be some suit in some meeting that said, we can't spend the money on this movie unless we make it like that. That's what people want. And that's not what this movie is. Mm-hmm. Like, and so like, I don't know. It's remarkable that it was allowed to be this.
Yeah.
And I'm just so thrilled. I'm so thrilled.
It is kind of a miracle.
Yeah. So that is Dune. We'll be back in 2 years for October 2023 when Dune Part 2 comes out.
Awesome.
And that's going to do it for us this week. If you have any opinions on anything we talked about, which is this week is just Dune. If you have any opinions on Dune, let us know. You can reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com or on our Twitter account @doofmedia, or you can go to our subreddit that's r/doofmedia, or our Instagram is also @doofmedia.
Yeah, and if you're not already subscribed to the Doofcast, we encourage you to subscribe and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on all of the major podcasting platforms.
And you can find all of our shows over at our website, doofmedia.com. And if you like this podcast or any of the Doof Media partner podcasts, you can support us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/doofmedia. You can donate at the $5 level or one of many levels that give you all kinds of cool bonus things, including our newest bonus show, which we call Doof After Dark, which Matt and I are going to record as soon as we finish this.
That's right.
Right now. Right now.
Immediately. So,
yeah.
So basically you could call it part 2 of this podcast if you wanted to, if you were so inclined. So you're basically what we're saying is you're missing part 2 of this podcast unless you subscribe on Patreon.
Imagine if you could never see Dune Part 2. It's exactly like that. It's exactly like that.
It is. So do that. And while you're doing that, also rating and review on Apple Podcasts would be a fantastic choice. Just in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Next week we will be back, and hopefully my voice will work again, and we will be back with Deconstructing James Cameron. We're finally getting to it, Matt. We're going to talk about Terminator 2 Judgment Day.
Been looking forward to it.
Yes, Judgment Day.
Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da 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 da.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.